Hi guys, so first things first, this is the first time I've ever done a YouTube video, so I'm sorry about some of the quality things. There's a watermark on the video, I'm sorry if you find that intrusive. I've been testing out a lot of different available screen recording software, and this one, the free version, sticks a watermark on there. I'm also sorry if the audio quality leaves something to be desired. If it gets on your nerves, I guess there's a mute button there for a reason. So, the picture I'm working on here is a picture of one of my friend's D&D characters. Her name is Lady Montag Valerius, a young noblewoman and infamous bachelorette. She is neutral evil, self-interested, pampered, and demanding of everyone around her, and she has a tendency to see other people, NPCs and player characters alike, as servants who owe her nothing but respect and privilege. She's not the only neutral evil character in this campaign. My character in this campaign is also neutral evil, making 2 out of 3. Most campaigns I've played in haven't had any evil-aligned characters in play, not player characters, and it's interesting to get to kind of take this approach, and I'm especially excited to play more, since evil alignments offer so much potential, I think, in the way of storytelling and character development. And that is partly because of how I, and to a certain extent my friends, treat the alignment system of D&D. It's often a flawed system, if only because it has a tendency to be misunderstood and misused. I feel like a lot of people who look at evil alignments have a really shallow, cartoonish approach to how they treat and play evil characters. And doing that really puts you in a box that you don't need to confine yourself to. In a lot of instances that I have seen with just interacting with other people who play and how they treat the game, they have a tendency to interpret an evil alignment as meaning one of the following. The character has no moral code. The character's intentions are evil at their core. The character harbors the wrong beliefs. Or the character's methods of achieving their goals are all evil. And it can't just be restricted to this, but I feel like these are some examples of just generally the way people treat their evil characters, and I don't think it's a very good way of treating evil characters. I think it's shows some fundamental misunderstandings of the nature of evil. And the main problems with these assumptions are that, number one, they don't offer any room for a character to have a great deal of moral complexity. 2, they're really unrealistic and fail to convey the difficult nature of evil and how evil relates to human nature. Number 3, they dehumanize the character by reducing them to such a two-dimensional view of what evil means. And number 4, they don't encompass what evil actually is. In other words, a character might fit none of those assumptions and still be evil. So first of all, I would like to explain as a point of contrast how I like to approach good versus evil characters using the Dungeons & Dragons alignment system. So obviously, first of all, as anyone who's familiar with the system knows, there are 2 basic axes along which characters' morality is defined. The first axis is law versus chaos, and the second is good versus evil. Law versus chaos is an easy one to explain, and it's not a very controversial or difficult one to explain, so I'm going to start out with that one. I often tie a character's attitude towards law versus chaos on the axis to their methods and core motivations. A lawful character believes in upholding or establishing a well-defined, possibly restrictive, status quo or set of laws. Or a lawful character might believe in working within the boundaries of the law, or within the social hierarchy, for example, when it comes to how they achieve their goals. A chaotic character, on the other hand, believes in tearing down or acting against the status quo, or society, or however things are ordered in their immediate life. And then right in between, a character who is neutral on the law-chaos axis either doesn't care or acts in a more mixed way towards the idea of order. And going along with that, it really helps to view this as a spectrum. A character defined as neutral might still have a slight bent one way or the other, and just because a character is lawful or chaotic doesn't mean they have to be absolutely lawful or chaotic. So you might have 2 characters who are lawful good, but who are lawful good for different reasons and to different extents. It doesn't purely define your character or put them in a box. It's just a way to define their general attitude towards order, obviously. So, with that out of the way, that's the really easy part. Good versus evil is always a more difficult axis to define. And the reason that people fall back on the assumptions I mentioned earlier is that they're really easy definitions to stick with. But I have a different way of thinking about it, a slightly different definition with how I approach good and evil characters in D&D. So it's going to probably take a moment. I like this approach, but a lot of people don't. So I guess just go ahead and hear me out if you're willing to. Whether or not a character is good or evil, and to what extent, can be kind of determined with their answer to the following question. Do the ends justify the means? Or, to word it differently, do good intentions or correct beliefs justify evil actions? A character who answers yes is evil, a character who answers no is good, and a character who answers sometimes is either evil or neutral. Now, let me explain this a little further. This approach obviously does not include what the character believes is right or wrong in the first place. Nowhere in that question does it ask, does your character believe in justice or honor? Or does your character believe in fairness? Or does your character believe in a god? It doesn't have anything to do with your character's core beliefs. This means that a character with any intentions or any goals can be good or evil, and those don't define them. And this might also, I guess, be a bit of like an uncomfortable way to deal with it, partly because it is so realistic. And you might hear you might hear that question, you might hear how I define the answers to it. You might say, hey, wait, but I think correct intentions justify a few evil actions, and I'm not evil. And that's the whole point of my approach to the system. It's a system that is designed to make evil characters who are still human, who are very realistic, who are more sympathetic and understandable, and who can be treated as such without being dehumanized or reduced down to, well, you're evil for believing the wrong thing. But if that's the case, what I've just said might sound like I'm saying that an evil character is just as good as a good character. It's just a label. But that's also not true. And then the next question is, why do I define this as evil? Because I have also played with a lot of people who they will have a character that they define as chaotic good, who takes the question, do good intentions justify evil actions? And they answer yes. And they play that character as chaotic good, and that's the label they use when that's not the label I would use. So the reason I define it as evil specifically is probably best explained by looking at an example of a few characters in fiction and some examples of how a character might be played as chaotic good or chaotic evil depending on their behavior and their answer to my question. So we're going to start with a really solid example. One of my personal favorite characters, Arthas from Warcraft 3. A lot of people are only familiar with his arc in the game on a surface level. That's partly because of how old the game is now. So I'm just going to give some context for anyone who doesn't know a whole lot. So the game is a fantasy game. It's very classic medieval fantasy. And towards the beginning, we're introduced to the character that we're going to be playing as for the rest of the game. And that is Arthas. And he's first presented to the player as a zealous, headstrong paladin. When he puts his stubbornness and pride to good use, we're on board with the game's missions. We attack and defeat enemies among orcs and undead with ruthless efficiency, and we feel a very satisfying rush when we win. We view it as victory, and we are pleased with ourselves and with our progress throughout the game whenever we win. And since the main character is defending his country with such fierce loyalty and determination, we're on his side, and we're tempted to consider him lawful good. But then comes one mission in particular, which I think changed a lot of people's minds. Anyone who knows a lot about the Warcraft games and their lore knows of the Culling of Stratholme, where Arthas, our main character, arrives at a village, Stratholme, which has been tainted by an undead scourge. So everyone in the town is sick and about to die and become part of the undead horde that's threatening the kingdom. So Arthas decides to eradicate the entire town. No one there has become undead yet, but he knows that they will be. He will have to fight and kill them anyway. His reasoning is that it is better to kill them now, out of mercy, to spare them the pain of transformation or the shame and vileness of becoming servants of their kingdom's worst enemy. In this case, Arthas's hands seem tied. What else is he to do? So, even in this moment, we as the player are on his side. We see his reasoning and we might agree with it, even if our gut reaction is horror at what he's doing. But here's the thing, and here is why this moment, I think, is a really good example of why he is evil aligned. He believes, obviously, in protecting his kingdom. That's been established well in the game by this point. And he has stopped and slain monsters and bandits and the undead scourge for preying upon civilians, preying upon innocents, his own people. Arthas believes that it is wrong to kill innocents, but in this moment, he thinks it's justified. He thinks it's the best option. So he kills innocents. And you might say that there isn't really a better option in this case, but the fact that he is willing to make that preemptive strike against innocent people really, I think, indicates that he is willing to cross lines and perform evil actions with good intentions. So his answer to the question, do good intentions justify evil actions, would be yes. And the Culling of Stratholme is one of the more well-known examples of his actions during the game, but he does follow a similar pattern multiple times. At one point, he, although not entirely intentionally, kills a friend. At one point, he burns the boats of his own followers, and he betrays loyal mercenaries who helped him in battle in order to regain his men's trust and rile them up. And those are obviously underhanded things to do. So why does he do it when he's supposed to be this honorable paladin? And then when that was how we saw him at the beginning of the game, why does he do this? In short, he does it in order to end the scourge that has been plaguing his homeland. He wants to drive out the demons, the undead. He wants to protect his people and his kingdom. His own pride and overzealousness come in towards the end, and then that taints his good intentions. But overall, what he wants to do is something right. And yet, because he is willing to play fast and loose with his own moral code, irreversible damage comes to the very people he has tried to defend. So for this reason, in addition to his desire to uphold and execute the law as a leader, I would call him lawful evil. And I think that he's a really good example of an evil character, a very obviously evil character with a lot of good intentions. And that brings me back to Montag here. The character I'm drawing, like I said, is neutral evil. And I think my friend plays her really well as an example of neutral evil done right, even though I should mention that she really doesn't exactly share my same view on defining good versus evil. Montag serves the devil Mephistopheles as a warlock, and she is swift to obey her patron in all things in exchange for furthering her own goals, gaining political power and social capital, and getting to enjoy the finest things in life. Her morals across both axes of character morality are extremely loose, and that puts her solidly in the neutral evil camp. She is definitely willing to cross moral boundaries, hers or anyone else's, if it means gaining something that she wants. If her goal justifies it, she will break any rule, regardless. So that, I think, really makes her very classic, typical neutral evil in a way. But during our first game session, she did something interesting in a few moments that really showed a great deal of character depth and complexity. For example, our party found the ghost of a woman who had been murdered by a necromancer. We were in this dungeon, we'd been wandering around, we heard this wailing and screaming and sobbing ahead of us. And we walked into the room and we found this ghost. She was disoriented, she was confused, she had no idea why she had suffered experimentation and murder at the hands of a necromancer. She had no idea why she could still see her own dead body, why she was still seeing, hearing, still suffering as a ghost. And Montag, of all people, was the character who rushed forward to comfort this ghost with a gentle voice and to swear to her that we were going to kill this necromancer and hopefully bring her rest in the afterlife. And that's a moment that I don't think I, at least, really expected. I didn't expect gentleness and tenderness from Montag. But that is what she showed this dead woman. And that shows that she doesn't just do evil, purely self-interested things. She has a gentler side, a human side, and she has potential to do good things. So I think that she really captures the idea of treating a evil character as still a person, an actual character first and foremost. A character who has potential for both right and wrong, for both good and evil, for selfishness and selflessness, and the potential to really show depth and complexity, the way that a lot of people shy away from. And for a last example, I think that it'd be interesting to look at the character of the typical idea of Robin Hood. And everyone knows basically the idea of a Robin Hood story. You have this guy who's kind of separate from society, he's from the society, and he steals from the rich to give to the poor. Now, you might have a chaotic good Robin Hood, or you might have a chaotic evil Robin Hood. And the difference, again, is that question that I went back to before. Do good intentions justify evil actions? And you might think, well, either way, he'd answer yes, because he's stealing. But not necessarily. That depends a little bit on what his moral code includes. Clearly, no matter what version of a Robin Hood type character we're looking at, given we have this story about a Robin Hood who robs the poor, robs the rich, gives to the poor, misspoke. Given that, we can already tell right off the bat that he believes very much in equality, he believes in giving back to the people, he believes in standing against tyranny, and all that gives him a chaotic alignment. But you might have a good Robin Hood who believes that there is genuinely nothing wrong with stealing specifically from government or from nobility. That might be part of his moral code, that those people don't deserve any of their money, the people deserve the money, therefore it is always justified to steal from them. And in that case, just because he justifies it as part of his moral code, you could say that he's not crossing any of his own moral boundaries. He's not doing anything he views as wrong in order to achieve his goals, and therefore he's good aligned. On the other hand, a chaotic evil version of the character might have the view that it is wrong to steal, it is wrong to kill, it is wrong to lie, and he might do all of those things, or he could violate in some way his belief in giving back to the people if the people somehow, for example, reject him and reject what he's trying to do for them. He might act in ways that aren't ultimately for their best interest. He might act in ways that are occasionally almost similar to the tyrants that he's opposing, depending on the particular nature of his moral code and the way that he approaches the act of stealing from the upper levels of society and giving to the lower levels. And that would be a chaotic evil version of that character. Even though they have a slightly different, but ultimately similar moral code, how willing one character versus another is to break that moral code if they think that it might be more convenient in the moment is what determines whether they're good or evil. So basically, in short, that's how I think evil characters should be approached in all storytelling media. So D&D, other games, storytelling in general, you should treat evil characters, just we in general need to treat them as characters, as people, first and foremost. Treating them with this sort of complexity and humanizing them allows for really compelling storytelling, character dynamics, and potential character arcs, both upward and downward. And here, coming up, we have the finished grayscale portrait of Montag, who is officially one of my favorite neutral evil characters I've ever seen handled. All right, goodbye.